I want to also point out, beside teachers, family engagement is important. A lot of good programs exist out there to engage families. I didn't say just parents, I meant families. Remember, these kids are likely to have family members outside the parents living with them. To the fact that the extent to which you can garner partnership with family members to expand learning environments, then you're likely going to get somewhere between 10 and 50% advancement of academic achievement as measured by literacy and numeracy instruments in ECLSK at least. So I would say that most of us wrap our arms around parent engagement and parent involvement, but a serious attempt to essentially deal with that does generate academic achievement directly. So they're a partner in the enterprise, you get a bump in academic achievement. I like to say that the principals who by third grade want to be sure they meet the NCLB growth requirements. If you don't do this, then you've got to do something else, because family engagement does give you a nice bump in achievement. Increased opportunity to learn. This is one of the reasons, back to the issue of what drives, or looks at least in a correlational way, drives academic achievement in the early learning venues and the early grades, is this access to educational capital. So in a school day from 8:30 to 3:30 or so forth, these kids will very likely need more and increased opportunities to learn. That's not enough time. Why? Because they're not getting it anywhere else. They're not getting it at home. The median educational level of DLL moms is about 8.5 years, either in the U.S. or in another country. So they're not going to compete well with individuals whose moms are getting 12, 13 years. And by the way, I say moms because the female correlation, education correlation with outcome is so strong in the United States. So we could get rid of all the dads, the moms, and educate them well, our kids would be great. These kids need increased opportunity to learn. How do you do that? After school programs, before school programs, Saturday programs, and summer school programs. In a meta-analysis that we did, which we've written about, essentially we get a bump of another 10 to 12% if children are involved in expanded opportunity to learn programs. So that means you involve parents, you make sure they send their kids early, have them stay late, and have them come in the summer, because most of them don't come to Disney World in the summer. So they're there, they're home. If you can engage them, you'll also get an enhanced bump in academic outcomes. So the opportunity to learn is critical. And lastly, I'll point out that pre-K is an absolute must for these kids. The data in Oklahoma, which I'll show you in a minute, it is the only place where we have evidence of elimination of the achievement gap for kids who come to school not speaking English. Now you can say, oh well, but that's pre-K. Listen, if they start at pre-K on an even playing field, you're much better off. Right now they're starting about 6 months behind at pre-K. If you can give them pre-K, the data is pretty clear, you can probably totally eliminate any gap by the beginning of kindergarten. Now you've got to work to keep that gap minimized, if not non-existent, but you don't have to worry about making that gap up plus other gaps as kids move through to the third grade. I want to lastly point out that all this is wrapped up in the kind of policies that we have, whether they're federal, whether they're local, whether they relate just to immigration, etc. So we have to, as educators, pay attention to the kind of policy implications that essentially bear on the challenges that exist for this population, which have to do with how we try to eradicate poverty, how we try to promote integration of immigrants, how we try to promote stability of teachers. One of the things we do, if it takes 3 years and you're losing those teachers, what do we do to stabilize that workforce? What do we do about access, making sure that we enhance pre-K access, as well as quality of programs. So policies which essentially impact other kids, particularly these policies impact our essential children and their families. Lastly, this is a slide I like very much. There are two of them that I like. This is the Tulsa pre-K program slide. It shows essentially what pre-K can do, particularly for Hispanics. Letter words, spelling, applied problems. And you can see the Hispanic population benefits the most out of that pre-K program. Okay? And we think that has to do with issues of family, because in pre-K you involve families. You do that. And so we think that's a critical element. Why Tulsa, Oklahoma? Why is this data from Tulsa instead of California or Florida or whatever? Is because Oklahoma adopted a universal pre-K almost 10 years ago. So we have data, longitudinal data, which suggests those kids, many of them Mexican immigrant family members, themselves citizens, going to pre-K at about 75 to 80% because it's voluntary, benefit very greatly from pre-K programs. We have now that data in New Jersey, New Mexico, and California, but this is the longest standing universal pre-K program in the country, which serves immigrant populations. We have a cost estimate for policymakers. We like to say that you start our kids, our dual language kids in pre-K, and you will save $8.95 in later services that they will not need. Special education, grade retention, after-school programs, etc., to try to reduce the achievement gap. So if you can get them to start an even playing field at kindergarten, you can essentially save down the road somewhere about $8 per dollar that was invested in pre-K. That's a pretty good investment, and that's policymakers. One last thing I want to point out that we're now saying to policymakers. Do you know that learning two languages is a cognitive advantage? So we didn't know that. We always thought, oh, learning two languages is really hard. What dual language does, what exposure to two languages does, is it challenges the prefrontal lobe in the early years. By challenging that prefrontal lobe, you have more neural connections. You don't have more neurons, but you have more connections. By the way, other things challenge your prefrontal lobe as well, like learning music and so forth. But actually being exposed to two languages creates a neurological network that is really quite positive later on in terms of executive function, how to plan, how to do things, how to discriminate what's important and what isn't, because bilingual kids have to do that. And we know now it has biological and neurological positive impacts. So not only can you save money, but you can actually have a better prepared social, emotional student who's ready to learn, basically. Last slide is the achievement gap reduction at kindergarten for Latino students. This is in letter word, spelling. It's more Tulsa data. But you can see five is ready for pre-K. So these are Latino kids who got pre-K versus did not get pre-K, and you can see the difference. Some of those kids are going to be 3 to 4 months behind the kids who got the pre-K. So at 5.0, at 5.2, 4.9, 5.0, 5.2, they're starting equal to other kids who are starting pre-K. Those other kids are already 6 months behind in some of those areas. In applied problems, more than 6 months behind. Does pre-K make a difference for this population I'm talking about? Absolutely. That's why I say pre-K is a must. I think the last couple of slides. Just so you want to know all this stuff and you want to read about it, there are 3 books that were published in the last 3 years now. 2010, Young English Language Learners. A colleague, Ellen Freedy, and I edited that volume. It's available from Teachers College Press. A lot of this data is there. A colleague, Jose Nunez, and I did a book for the American Psychological Association on the bilingualism and cognition issue, published in 2011. And then my wife and I, who is a first grade teacher, wrote a book called Education of Hispanics in Early Childhood, mainly because she spent 35 years teaching those kids, and I've spent about that amount of time trying to study them. The combination is what is, we tried to put it in that book. I'm not sure it comes across, but the data and the practice try to come together in that volume. As we move forward in numerous educational challenges and opportunities in this country and globally, the issue of addressing children who come from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds is not going to go away in this country and others. Some of my work now is extended to Europe and Africa and others, where as we migrate, as mobility becomes even more common, it always was the norm, but as even more common, then we will wrestle with these issues of how to deal not only with the adults, but with the children who come to us, in which we have a particular charge to enhance their opportunities in the future. So it's been my pleasure to discuss some of these issues as we know them presently. I think the field of developmental science is growing around this topic and around these issues, and certainly we hope that what we learn can be translated to those of us who train individuals, who go out and train, who work with children, and that the whole chain of influence is more substantive with regard to these populations.